They planted drugs in her car, laughed as they dragged her away, but the moment she smiled in that holding cell, everything changed. Because the woman they thought was just another black suspect, she was CIA. And she had just activated something they never saw coming. It was just past midnight when Camille Dawson turned onto a quiet residential street in Arlington, Virginia. The neighborhood slept behind closed curtains, porch lights flickering dimly like distant stars. She drove with purpose, her hands steady on the wheel of a black SUV that looked civilian but had a hidden comms relay embedded in the dash. The mission was almost done. 6 weeks undercover, weaving through charity events, neighborhood barbecues, and fake consultations, building a quiet case against a corrupt web that ran deeper than anyone outside the agency suspected. Tonight, she was planning to disappear. The data chip was secure in her jacket lining, her report drafted, her exit planned, and then blue and red lights flared behind her. Camille glanced into the mirror, calm, controlled. She tapped the brakes and pulled to the curb. No rush, no panic. She'd been trained to handle far worse in war zones and foreign embassies. She reached for her license and registration, already aware of the two men stepping out of the squad car. The tall one, square jaw, slow stride, was Sergeant Cole Matthews. His partner, stockier and twitchier, was Officer Dean Rourke. "Evening, ma'am," Matthews said, flashing his light directly into her face. "Know why we pulled you over?" Camille looked at him flatly. "No, sir. I stopped fully at the intersection." Matthews grinned. "That's funny. I could have sworn you rolled through. Reckless at this hour, don't you think?" Before she could respond, Rourke's voice rang out from the rear. "Hey, Sarge! You might want to see this." Camille's eyes narrowed slightly. She hadn't heard them open the trunk. Her SUV had auto-lock. She hadn't given them consent. But she stayed still, said nothing. Matthews returned, smirking. "Mind stepping out of the vehicle?" "On what grounds?" she asked evenly. "Suspicion of possession," he said, gesturing to the back. "There's a bag in your trunk that's got us concerned." A flicker passed through her eyes, almost invisible. That bag hadn't been there when she left the safe house. Camille stepped out, hands relaxed, gaze sharp. She walked toward the back of the car where Rourke theatrically held up a Ziploc bag of white powder. "Bingo," he said. "Lady, you're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." Camille didn't resist. She let them cuff her. She didn't argue, but she looked at them, deep, unblinking, and said one thing. "You boys picked the wrong woman." Matthews laughed. "We'll see how funny that sounds in court." The ride to the station was silent. Camille stared out the window while the cops chuckled in the front seat, convinced they had made their big bust of the week. They didn't know she was recording everything through the stud in her left earring. They didn't know she had already marked their names in her case file. They didn't know she had encountered officers like them before. Inside the small, worn-down precinct, Camille was booked without ceremony. Rourke tossed the evidence bag onto the counter like he'd just won a prize at the fair. Caught her red hand, he told the desk sergeant. "She'll probably cry by morning." She watched. She memorized faces, noted camera blind spots, listened to the laughter, the code switching, the casual corruption like it was background music. And standing off to the side, behind the fingerprinting desk, was a younger officer with hesitant eyes. Ben Keller. He watched her closely. Something in her calm didn't match the profile they'd written. Something in his gut whispered, "This one's different." Camille sat alone in the holding cell, the cold metal bench digging into her back as the fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The room smelled of bleach and sweat, but she barely noticed. Her breathing was slow, her heartbeat steady. This wasn't her first time in a cage, though this one wasn't in Kabul or Caracas. It was in Virginia. Small town, dirty floor, bigger rot. She leaned her head back against the wall and listened. Really listened. She could hear Officer Matthews' boots dragging along the corridor tiles, the squeak of Rourke's chair in the break room, and the nervous pacing of a younger pair of feet near the front desk. Timing, pattern, rhythm. The station had a heartbeat, and she was memorizing it. Of course, a hole. Sergeant Cole Matthews leaned against the break room counter, coffee in hand. the same smug expression carved into his face like stone. "You think she's ex-military or just another angry type?" he said, smirking. She didn't even flinch. Officer Dean Rourke laughed, flipping through his phone. "She'll break by morning, they all do. One night in that cell and she'll be begging to cut a deal." Matthews nodded. "Still, she's got eyes like she's sizing us up." Rourke shrugged. "She can size up all she wants. Bag of coke says otherwise. System doesn't care how smart you look when you've got a felony charge." What they didn't know was that Camille had already triggered 2 encrypted signals. One had gone directly to a CIA satellite relay. The other was picked up by Agent Daniel Price, currently sitting in a secure intelligence hub outside DC, sipping black coffee and watching her GPS signature flicker across a tactical screen. The second her tracker went live, his team mobilized. They were already inside Arlington's radius, watching the precinct from unmarked sedans, listening to every radio transmission, mapping the exits and timing the patterns. The CIA wasn't coming to negotiate. They were coming to expose everything. Back inside the station, Officer Ben Keller couldn't shake the feeling in his gut. He had watched the whole thing from the booking desk. He'd seen the way Matthews and Rourke walked in with that evidence bag before the search was even documented. He'd processed the woman's ID himself. Camille Dawson. No record, no resistance, no fear, just silence. Composed, calculated, too calm for someone supposedly caught red-handed with narcotics. Something wasn't right. He opened her file again, scrolling through standard data. Age 35, local address in Falls Church, employment, independent consultant. But 6 years of missing information. Not a gap, a blackout. No tax filings, no medical records, no social media. Just a name floating in space. Keller leaned back and whispered to himself, "That's not normal." He stood, glancing around, then made his way into the back records room. Lights flickered overhead as he logged into the terminal and ran a search. Matthews plus Rourke, rest, records. The screen lit up with a long list. Over a dozen arrests in the last year alone, nearly all of them people of color, nearly all on minor traffic stops that escalated into felony drug charges. Same language, same narrative, same timing. Every case followed the same playbook. Keller felt his stomach knot. His fingers trembled on the mouse. This wasn't coincidence. This was design. Meanwhile, Camille closed her eyes in her cell. Not to sleep, but to sharpen. She didn't need rest, she needed clarity. She remembered her father's arrest when she was just 7 years old, dragged out of their home by white officers after being accused of stealing from the grocery store where he worked. They never found evidence. Didn't need to. His word wasn't enough. And even after the charges were dropped, the shame never left their house. That night changed her life. She made a vow, never to be powerless again. That promise led her to the CIA, and now here she was again, but this time she had the training. And the leverage. Keller returned to his desk, eyes darting to the monitor that displayed a live feed from the holding cells. Camille was sitting perfectly still, back straight, eyes half closed, not praying, not panicking, waiting, watching. And that terrified him more than if she'd been screaming. He opened the arrest report from Matthews and Rourke. The same phrases jumped off the screen. Driver appeared nervous, consented to search, substance found in trunk. Keller muttered under his breath. She never gave consent. He had been there. He had watched it unfold. She asked why. Matthews ordered her out. She never agreed. He stood abruptly and walked toward the holding cell block, clipboard in hand as cover. He stopped outside Camille's cell and cleared his throat. "You've got a bail hearing set for later today," he said, not meeting her eyes. "You should get ready." Camille looked at him calmly. "Officer Keller, do you believe I belong here?" He hesitated. "I don't know." "You do," she said, voice low but firm. "But the question is, do you believe you have the right to ignore it?" Keller shifted. "I'm just doing my job." Camille tilted her head. "That's what they count on." He turned and walked away, but the words followed him. He sat at his desk, hands resting over the keyboard, unsure what to do next. He looked across the room and saw Matthews and Rourke laughing again, leaning back in their chairs like kings. Keller knew something had to give. He couldn't keep pretending nothing was wrong. He logged back into the terminal and attached the arrest files he had found to a draft email. Subject line, pattern of misconduct. Recipient, anonymous internal affairs tip line. But he stopped, fingers hovering. This wasn't enough. Someone higher had to see it. He opened a secure browser, accessed a federal back channel he'd seen once in training, and typed one name, Agent Daniel Price. The interface gave him a simple prompt. Attach materials? He did, then clicked send. No turning back. At that very moment, inside the cell, Camille moved slightly. She looked straight into the hallway camera and gave the smallest smile. She knew. She had been watching Keller this whole time, and she knew when the first crack had formed. A few blocks away, a black SUV rolled past the precinct. Inside, Agent Price glanced at the notification on his tablet. Incoming packet, priority 1. He read the contents, eyes narrowed. She's got an insider, he muttered. The rookie. His team was already in position. Earpieces were adjusted, jackets buttoned, badges ready. ETA on controlled extraction? One of the agents asked. 2 hours. We hit them just before the bail hearing, Price replied. No leaks, no loose ends. We bring the whole thing down. Back in the break room, Rourke glanced toward Keller. You notice the kid's been jumpy? Matthews shrugged. So what? He's new. Long as he doesn't run his mouth, he's fine. Rourke grinned. And if he does? Matthews sipped his coffee and said flatly, we bury it. They had done it before. But this time, they picked the wrong target. At exactly 2:47 p.m., the front doors of the Arlington precinct creaked open with a sudden gust of dry air. Nobody noticed at first. It was just another group of suits. Until the gold badges flashed from beneath their jackets. Agent Daniel Price led the entry. Tall, silver-templed, and steady-eyed, he didn't say a word as he crossed the threshold. His team flanked him, silent but alert. The kind of alert you don't teach in academy. The kind that came from missions where hesitation got people killed. At the front desk, the sergeant looked up, blinking. Can I help you? Price calmly set a folder on the counter. Federal investigation. We'll need access to your records, personnel files, and holding cells. Immediately. The sergeant frowned. Under what authority? Price didn't blink. Central Intelligence Agency. This station is compromised. The room seemed to freeze. Phones stopped ringing. Coffee cups paused mid-air. For a moment, all that moved was the flickering light overhead and the growing tension in the room. Matthews looked up from the hallway and locked eyes with Keller. His smirk faltered. Rourke stood behind him, jaw tightening. What the hell is this? Matthews asked, his voice rising. Who called the feds? But Camille already knew. She stood calmly in her cell facing the door, hands behind her back, posture like a soldier standing for inspection. She had heard the footsteps change, the weight in them, the rhythm. She knew her team had arrived. And she also knew they wouldn't just be freeing her. They were here to dismantle the entire rot. Agent Price moved quickly. We'll start with a review of all arrests made by Sergeant Cole Matthews and Officer Dean Rourke over the last 12 months. And I'll need direct access to the holding cell surveillance feed. Keller stood frozen at his desk. He watched Matthews' face shift from anger to calculation to barely concealed panic. For the first time, the sergeant didn't look in control. Rourke muttered something under his breath and backed away toward the hallway. But it was too late. Two agents were already reviewing hard drives on portable stations. Screens filled with arrest logs, body cam clips, digital fingerprints, and internal messages. The red flags popped up instantly. Copied narratives, staged search justifications, repeat suspects with no lawyers present. It wasn't just misconduct, it was a pattern, a system. Agent Price pulled a flash drive from his pocket and plugged it in. This, he said, is a recording from earlier this morning. Captured from a live surveillance device embedded in a federal asset's jewelry. It documents an illegal traffic stop, illegal search, and the planting of false evidence. All conducted by Matthews and Rourke. The audio echoed through the room. Rourke's voice, cocky and careless. "She won't fight it, you know the type, no one believes them anyway." Matthews, "Just shut up and smile, it's clean, like we always do." The room went still. A low, cold silence swept through the station. The sergeant at the front desk stepped back. Are you saying?" Agent Price looked up, his eyes unreadable. "I'm not saying anything. The evidence says it all." Camille's cell buzzed. The door slid open. An agent stepped inside. "Ms. Dawson?" She didn't move immediately. She held that moment, the calm before the reckoning. Then, she stepped forward, past the threshold, and looked back just once. Not at the cell, but at the surveillance camera mounted in the corner. She let it see her smile. In the hallway, as she walked toward the front lobby, Keller stood. Their eyes met. No words needed, but she paused. "You made the right call," she said quietly. "That takes more than a badge. That takes guts." Keller swallowed hard. "What happens now?" Camille nodded toward the break room. "Now? They answer for every life they ruined." Agents moved in unison. Matthews was surrounded in seconds. "You're making a mistake," he barked. "I want a lawyer." Price stepped forward, voice low and sharp. "You'll get one, in federal court, alongside a list of charges long enough to sink a career twice over." Rourke tried to run. He didn't make it past the side door. An agent tackled him, clean, cuffing him as witnesses looked on. A female officer from patrol gasped. "Are they really?" Another agent nodded. "Both of them, framing suspects, falsifying evidence, obstruction of justice. It's over." Keller sat back down, heart racing. It was over. But for Camille, it had just begun. The fallout was immediate. Within 24 hours, news of the arrest exploded across every media platform in the country. "Virginia officers caught framing woman, turns out she's CIA," one headline read. Cable anchors debated it all night. Twitter lit up with fury, and video footage of Matthews and Rourke being escorted out in handcuffs replayed on a loop. They looked nothing like the smug men who had paraded through the station earlier that week. Their heads were lowered now, their eyes hollow, and the story had just begun. The charges were stacked tall. Falsifying reports, obstruction of justice, civil rights violations, abuse of power. Over a dozen previous convictions were reopened for review. Every case they had touched was now tainted. Victims once written off and forgotten were being called one by lawyers who never used to answer their phones. Camille stayed out of the spotlight. That was how she preferred it. Her name wasn't in the papers, her face wasn't on the screen. No press conference, no victory speech. Her work didn't need applause. But that didn't mean the impact was small. Her quiet decision to activate the tracker that night had sparked a firestorm. A storm that wiped out 2 careers and uncovered a systemic rot that had been buried for years. Inside the precinct, things were never the same. Several officers resigned, others were suspended pending investigation. Policies were rewritten, cameras upgraded, consent procedures overhauled, training restructured. But culture doesn't change overnight. Keller knew that. He felt it every time he walked the halls. Some officers still wouldn't meet his eye. Some blamed him, called him a snitch behind his back. Others, though, nodded silently in passing. Quiet acknowledgments from people who weren't ready to speak, but were watching. A week later, Camille and Keller met in a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. No uniforms, no briefcases, just 2 people at a corner booth beneath a humming light, a cup of black coffee between them. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Keller said, fidgeting with his napkin. Camille stirred her coffee. "You earned this conversation." Keller looked down. "I'm still not sure if it changed anything. The department's still broken. There are more like them. We just caught 2. Camille met his gaze. "It changed everything. Not just for me. For every person they railroaded. For every young officer who sees someone like you speak up. Don't underestimate what that costs, or what it creates." He gave a faint nod, his shoulders easing. "I didn't even know who you were," he admitted, "until the agents came in. You don't exactly scream CIA." Camille smirked. "Good. That means I'm doing my job right." He chuckled, then turned serious. "What happens now?" She took a sip, eyes distant. "I move on. Another town, another name, another fight." There was a beat of silence. "You ever get tired?" She looked at him, calm but unflinching. "Of the system, yes. Of fighting it, never." When she left, the bell above the door jingled quietly. Keller sat for a while after, staring at the empty booth across from him. Then he pulled out a notepad and began writing. Notes, questions, ideas. Change starts somewhere. Camille's next destination was already locked in. She boarded a train under a different alias, her file encrypted, her mission classified. But before she disappeared into the crowd, she pulled out a folded photo from her jacket pocket. One of her father, holding her at age 7. His arms wrapped tight around her, like he knew the world would try to crush her someday. She stared at it for a moment, then tucked it back into her coat, squared her shoulders, and walked forward. Justice for now had been served, but the war wasn't over, and she was still in it. Sometimes justice doesn't come with flashing lights or loud headlines. Sometimes it walks in quiet, wearing a calm expression, waiting for the right moment and pressing a silent button that changes everything. Camille Dawson wasn't looking to be a hero. She didn't need a camera crew or a courtroom speech. All she needed was one moment, one signal, one chance to remind the system that not everyone folds, that even when the odds are stacked, the truth still has its own kind of power. The men who thought they could frame her are gone now, stripped of their badges, their swagger, their freedom. Their victims, those who were silenced, buried under fake charges, are beginning to rise. And somewhere in another town, another woman walks into a diner. Simple clothes, sharp eyes. No one knows who she really is, but when they try her, they'll find out the hard way. This isn't just a story about a woman who fought back. It's a story about what happens when people stop looking away, when someone says, "No more," when a rookie officer chooses truth over silence, when the invisible decide to be seen. You don't have to be CIA to make a difference. You don't need clearance to do what's right. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to ask one question, and the conviction not to walk past the answer. So, ask yourself, if you were Keller, what would you have done? And if you were Camille, would you have stood your ground, knowing no one would believe you, just long enough for the truth to come roaring through the door? Because the truth will always come. It doesn't whisper, it knocks. And when it does, the world changes, whether it's ready or not. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to know they're not alone. Someone needs to know that the truth still matters. That justice isn't always loud, but it's always possible. Like, comment, subscribe, and above all, stay awake. Because power doesn't fear force. It fears awareness.